Hello, my name is Poppy Wren, and I never imagined my own sister could turn on me like that. One dark, stormy night, 38 miles from home, she kicked me out of the car, abandoned me to teach me a lesson for discovering her secret. Was it just punishment or something far darker? I had always thought family meant protection, trust, loyalty. But what happens when the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones orchestrating your erasure? And the question that haunts me still: what lengths would she go to keep me invisible? And could anyone, even my bodyguard, save me from the storm she created? I never imagined a drive north toward the lake could become a turning point in my life. It was late October, and Seattle's chill had already settled into the bones of the roads, the trees bending under the weight of wet branches, mist curling up from slick pavement. Celine said it would be a peaceful weekend at the cabin by Lake Crescent, just family, old stories, and catching up. I packed my bags in her car, convinced everything was normal. My boots hit the floorboard. My heart hoped for laughter. We were pushing past 11:30 p.m. when the rain came down hard, windshield wipers struggling to keep up. Celine drove, white-knuckled, her face taut in the dim glow of passing street lamps. I watched raindrops smear, our world behind glass dissolving into darkness. My cell phone had no bars, no signal. I clutched my coat tighter, listening to the hum of tires and that persistent slap of rain. Then she asked me about the documents I'd found earlier, the ones in her briefcase. My stomach had curled when I opened that folder back at her desk. Estate papers, files I never should have seen, signatures I recognized as mine crossed out, forged. She didn't look at me. She didn't say sorry. She just nodded once, tight-lipped, as if she'd been caught in something that never should have been mine to know. When I brought it up softly, asked how she could do it, Celine stiffened, her eyes sharpened. "You shouldn't have opened that," she said. I told her I believed Dad left things fair, that what I saw didn't make sense. She said I was naive. Then she said she wanted me to learn my place. Her words broke me a little, but I stood up. I said, "You think I'm someone you can ignore." She slammed on the brakes. I turned to see her face in the rear view, a reflection in rain-streaked glass. Anger flashed. "You've always thought too much," she spat. "Well, tonight you'll get some truth." The car skidded on wet asphalt, screeching. The headlights cut through a wall of water. Then she jerked the wheel. The door opened. She said nothing else. Just, "Get out!" And the engine roared away, tires spinning, until even that noise was swallowed by the downpour. I sat there, heart pounding, door nearly torn from my hand by the wind. I stepped into the mud. My boots sank. The cold seeped up through my socks. Rain drummed on my head. I could barely catch a breath. 38 miles from anything. No streetlights, no signs, no familiarity. The lake cabin, the lights, the stories, all faded into the wet night. I walked, ankle-deep in mud, coat soaked through. I thought about the time I spent helping her with her public speeches, the thank you emails I drafted under her name, the accounts I balanced while she stood on the stage, and I remembered dinners where she told family jokes at my expense, making me feel invisible, and always less. Dad had called me Poppy the Helper. In my memory, I smiled gently. But tonight, I shouted into the darkness, "I never asked to be your shadow!" My breath came in sharp bursts. Cold water poured in through a tear in the hem of my coat. I caught sight of my reflection in a mirror-like puddle. Rain tilted down, the sky a black bruise overhead. I slumped against a mile marker post. Legs unsteady. My heart thumping so loud I thought I might stop. I pressed hands to wet gravel. Each drop felt like a betrayal. Then headlights, a single car beam cutting through the rain. At first I thought it was a hallucination, something I'd prayed for. The car slowed near me, came to a halt. I squinted through the rain. I saw someone step into the downpour. Tall, broad shoulders, wet coat hanging heavy. Familiar voice echoing in my memory. I couldn't believe it. After all these lost years. My heart turned over in my chest. Why him? How had he known where to come? My fear trembled into something else. Hope. I took a step forward, boots sinking in mud. water dripping into my eyes. The figure raised a hand, just one, and said my name. Poppy? I froze. The storm howled. My heart jumped. Hope like a fragile ember flickered. The silhouette that stepped into the rain wasn't a stranger, but I hadn't seen him in 10 years. My teeth chattered as I blinked through the sheet of cold droplets. The stranger's outline resolved into a tall man, his coat plastered with rain, the brim of a fedora shading his face. Recognition struck me before my brain could catch up. August Rilke. My chest tightened, a mix of relief and disbelief. How in the world was he here, at this precise mile marker, during the dead of night, while I was drenched and exhausted? He crouched slightly, offering his hand. Poppy, he said, voice low, but unmistakably familiar. My knees shook, mud sucking at my heels. I took his hand cautiously, feeling a firm but not intimidating grip. His eyes scanned the dark forest behind me before settling back on mine. Get into my truck, he instructed. The way he said it carried authority, but not condescension, and I obeyed almost immediately. The warmth of the cab was like a sudden sunrise. He handed me a blanket, and I wrapped it tightly around my shoulders, still dripping. Coffee steamed in a paper cup, and he pressed it into my trembling hands. Why are you here? I asked, almost whispering. Part of me wanted to believe he had simply stumbled upon my predicament by chance, but something in his gaze told me there was more. I was in the area, he replied cautiously, for other reasons. But when I saw you, I knew I had to stop. You shouldn't be out here alone. He didn't elaborate, yet there was a weight behind his words, a gravity that suggested he understood far more than he should. The rhythmic patter of rain against the roof of the truck seemed to slow time. I studied him, noting the way his hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, the slight tilt of his head, the deliberate calmness in his movements. Memories came flooding back, briefings in darkened rooms, his instructions during family gatherings, the way he always seemed 3 steps ahead of anyone else in the room. August had once been involved with Celine's security detail, a fact she never mentioned, and I realized now that his presence wasn't random at all. It was intentional. You worked for her? I asked, my voice betraying both curiosity and suspicion. And you left? He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at the memory. I did. I saw things, how she treated people, how she manipulated family members for her gain. It wasn't right. I wanted to speak up, but I was bound legally, silenced. I knew no one would believe me. My heart sank a little. I had always thought I was alone in sensing the cracks in Celine's polished image. And now here was August, a witness who had remained silent for years, yet who had cared enough to be here at the worst possible hour for me. I sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth. So, why help me now? I asked, keeping my voice steady, despite the shiver that ran through me. After all this time. August shrugged slightly, eyes on the darkened highway ahead. Some debts don't age well. You needed someone tonight. I'm here. I let the words sink in, the subtle weight of his honesty giving me a momentary reprieve from panic, but unease remained. Trust had never come easily, especially when Celine was involved. He handed me a dry change of clothes, a jacket, a soft cotton shirt, thick socks. I stripped out of my wet layers, the warmth enveloping me like a shield. I couldn't help but notice his quiet efficiency, the precise way he had everything ready before I even realized I needed it. We drove toward a roadside diner, headlights cutting through the mist. The storm had begun to ease, but the air was still heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. I felt myself sinking into the seat, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. My body had endured cold and rain, but my mind reeled from betrayal, shock, and the mounting questions about Celine's deception. At the diner, August guided me to a booth, and I wrapped myself in the blanket once more. He pushed a steaming plate of eggs and toast toward me. I barely noticed the food. My mind was replaying every detail of the day: the briefcase, the forged signatures, Celine's sharp, controlled voice, and the sudden, ruthless decision to leave me on that highway like I didn't exist. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I sipped coffee, trying to find steadiness in the rhythm of the diner's neon lights and quiet hum of appliances. Finally, I spoke. You saw her do all this, and you just left? The accusation wasn't meant to sting. It was a release, an attempt to voice years of confusion and frustration. I left for my own survival, he said, calmly but firmly. I couldn't let myself become part of her schemes. But seeing you out there, I couldn't ignore it. His gaze met mine. There are others who have suffered quietly under her hand. I can help you, but it has to be smart, deliberate. Relief mixed with a flicker of hope. I finally allowed myself to exhale. I don't know where to start. I want to fight, but I feel trapped. You don't need to scream to be dangerous, August said, leaning back slightly, voice low but edged with conviction. You just need proof, evidence she can't deny, the right moves, at the right time. He reached into his wallet, producing a small, slim flash drive. The metal gleamed faintly in the diner's dim light. I wasn't just watching, he explained. I recorded things no one else has seen yet. He slid it across the table toward me. I stared, fingers hovering over the cold metal, anticipation and fear mixing in my chest. This was the leverage I needed, the missing puzzle piece. A tangible way to confront Celine, to turn years of subtle injustice into something undeniable. The diner clock ticked steadily. Rain continued to drizzle outside, but inside, the world felt contained, almost suspended. I reached for the flash drive. The weight in my hand grounded me. For the first time that night, after hours of cold, mud, and betrayal, I felt a spark of power, calm, measured, and ready. I tucked the flash drive into my coat pocket and looked at August. We start in the morning? I asked, voice steady, though my pulse remained high. He nodded. We start smart. No rush, no mistakes. You'll have your chance. I leaned back, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The storm was fading outside, but inside, a new resolve took root. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was preparing to reclaim my voice, my rights, and ultimately, my dignity. I held the small flash drive in my palm, feeling its cool metal against my skin as the diner's fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The storm had eased outside, leaving the air damp but still, the soft remnants of rain dripping from the eaves and puddling along the roadside. August Rilke, sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, didn't rush me. His presence was steady, deliberate, the kind of quiet authority that made me feel simultaneously safe and exposed. I glanced at him, the memory of our last encounter years ago rushing back, and wondered how the same man who had once trained under the strictest of protocols was now here, offering me protection and guidance in a situation that felt dangerously personal. We left the diner just after dawn, the fog rolling thick over the Snoqualmie forest as we drove. The narrow road twisted through towering pines, damp leaves crunching beneath the tires, the forest seeming to swallow the little light available. My mind was racing faster than the wheels beneath us, replaying every detail of Celine's betrayal. The drive was silent, except for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the occasional sigh from August, a subtle acknowledgement that he was processing his own memories while staying vigilant for mine. Every mile deeper into the forest felt like peeling away layers of my past, confronting the truth that had been hidden behind Celine's polished smile and relentless control. August's cabin appeared after a winding stretch, small but sturdy, almost invisible among the towering evergreens. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to enter. Inside, it was warm, Spartan, and functional. A wood stove crackled softly, sending gentle waves of heat into the air. The space smelled faintly of pine and aged wood, the kind of scent that clung to memories and grounded you in the present. I removed my soaked jacket and shoes, feeling relief wash over me in waves. The first moments of safety allowed my body to slacken, but my mind refused to quiet. Every corner of the cabin whispered possibilities, planning, strategies, and revenge, all tangled with fear and exhaustion. "Sit," August said, nodding toward a chair near the stove. His gaze lingered on me in a way that suggested he was measuring not just my physical state, but the emotional residue of being left for dead in the forest hours earlier. I lowered myself into the chair, grateful for the warmth but wary of the vulnerability. He slid the flash drive across the small wooden table toward me. Its simplicity belied the gravity of what it contained. "Show me," I whispered, almost afraid to break the tension. August connected it to his laptop. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly the room filled with images and snippets of conversations. Celine's voice, sharp and calculated, cutting into moments I had once thought mundane. There she was, laughing as she redirected a family lawyer's attention away from my rightful claim. Another clip revealed her subtly manipulating our mother, Viola, planting doubts and controlling narratives. Each frame was a meticulous record of deceit. Then came the footage I had anticipated but dreaded. A document being signed, her hand carefully crafting a forgery that erased my name from our father's estate. My stomach dropped, a deep pit forming that was both shock and vindication. Memories bubbled up unbidden. I recalled the charity gala 2 years prior, a night when Celine had insisted I accompany her as her assistant. The grandeur of the event had been suffocating. Chandeliers glimmered overhead while her socialite friends whispered compliments in her direction, entirely oblivious to me. When a prominent guest mistakenly assumed I was part of the serving staff, Celine had let it slide with a thin, polite smile. I had spent that night invisible, a shadow unnoticed, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres while she basked in attention I had quietly helped orchestrate. The sting was fresh now, sharp enough to make my fingers curl involuntarily. This wasn't oversight. This was deliberate, layered humiliation, an intricate exercise in erasure and control. August's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "It wasn't negligence," he said firmly, eyes scanning my expression for comprehension. "She planned this. Every snub, every manipulated smile. It was strategic. She doesn't just ignore you. She erases you, purposefully. Every action was calculated to diminish your presence, to make you believe you were expendable." I swallowed hard, the heat of embarrassment and anger mingling with a deep, sorrowful clarity. It had never been about mistakes or misunderstandings. It had been about power, control, and a need to assert dominance, not just over assets, but over me as her sister. For years, I had questioned myself, replayed every interaction, wondering if I had misread intentions. The evidence now left no room for doubt. I leaned back, letting the weight of realization settle, and felt a strange mixture of grief and empowerment. My body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the sheer magnitude of the manipulation I had endured. August watched, understanding, never prying, but subtly guiding me toward acceptance and strategy. He spoke quietly, almost gently. "Knowing is the first step. Now you prepare. Carefully, deliberately. You have what she couldn't erase. Proof. And you'll need every piece if you want to reclaim what's yours." The fog outside began to thin, sunlight piercing through the dense tree line in fragile beams. My mind, however, remained a storm, reconciling memories, fears, and the undeniable need for action. Every clip on the flash drive was a thread, each connecting to Celine's broader tapestry of deceit, and I felt the first true understanding of the scope of what I was up against. Then August opened another folder labeled Estate 2018. My breath caught as he revealed a version of the will, my name absent, completely omitted. A wave of icy clarity washed over me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a targeted erasure, meticulously documented and enacted. My eyes stung as the enormity of the act pressed down, yet beneath the shock simmered something stronger: determination. I realized that the time for hesitation was over. Every memory, every slight, every orchestrated humiliation, all pointed toward one conclusion. This wasn't an accident. It was war. And I had the tools to fight back, carefully, with precision, and with the advantage of truth firmly in my hands. I clenched my fists around the flash drive, feeling the cold metal transmit both fear and resolve. "We start tomorrow," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "We don't just respond. We dismantle everything she built on lies." August nodded, a subtle acknowledgement passing between us, the unspoken understanding that we were no longer in the realm of mere survival. Strategy had replaced panic, and the long-hidden power of truth was finally mine to wield. The drive back to Tacoma was quiet, yet every mile felt heavier than the last. August navigated the rain-slicked highways with the same calm precision that had always unnerved me in my youth. I stared out the window at the blurred lights, the trees a shadowed blur, my mind racing as it replayed every betrayal Celine had orchestrated. My fingers absent-mindedly traced the outline of the flash drive in my coat pocket. The weight of it was both literal and symbolic, a small rectangle that held the truth of years of manipulation, humiliation, and theft. Arriving at the Hemmings family estate brought a surge of memories, not all pleasant. The sprawling house, with its manicured lawns and pristine facades, had always been a place where appearances mattered more than feelings. My footsteps on the gravel driveway echoed a mix of apprehension and determination. August walked beside me, silent but alert, his presence a steadying force against the storm of emotions churning inside me. I had rehearsed my words, my composure, my arguments, but I knew Celine had already anticipated most of them. She thrived in control, and every family gathering was another stage for her to perform. Inside the formal dining hall, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender from the centerpiece arrangements. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, cutting across the room in thin, sharp lines, illuminating every seat around the long table. Viola, our mother, greeted me with a tense smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. I felt my heart tighten, memories of my childhood craving approval but being constantly sidelined pressed against my chest. I reminded myself this wasn't about her judgment. This was about truth and reclaiming my place. Celine stood at the head of the table, radiating calculated charm. Her smile was impeccable, but there was a glint in her eyes that told me she had prepared for this confrontation. Before I could sit, she began, "Everyone, this is Poppy. Please, try not to let her presence disrupt the meeting." Her words were soft but loaded with venom, carrying the weight of all the times she had subtly undermined me. I noticed the subtle smirks from cousins who had once been allies. They had already bought into her narrative. The seating arrangement was no accident. My chair was pushed to the far corner, no name card, no welcoming gesture. Every element of the room reminded me of past neglect, past erasures. It was a trap disguised as reconciliation, and I recognized it immediately. I felt my stomach churn, but held my posture, refusing to show the fear that curled beneath my ribs. August subtly shifted beside me, his gaze scanning the room, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this moment of orchestrated humiliation. Then came the accusations. Celine presented evidence that I had somehow leaked confidential family information to rivals, fabricating documents with a casual precision that made my blood run cold. I tried to respond, but the room seemed to conspire against me. "Let's keep the peace," one cousin said, a phrase that masked complicity and cowardice. I swallowed the impulse to argue, knowing any misstep could be used against me, furthering the illusion of my guilt. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the icy calculation that I had learned over years of being overlooked. Observe. Absorb. Plan. August's intervention was subtle, precise. "Actually," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I was there, and I have footage that shows the truth." The room froze, eyes flicking from him to me and back. Celine's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, revealing the slightest hint of uncertainty. But I did not release the flash drive. Not yet. I wanted to see just how far she would push, to measure her hubris, to gauge the depth of her contempt before revealing my hand. Then Celine crossed a line. "You'll always be the accident Mom never wanted," she said, her tone dripping with feigned concern. The words, aimed to wound, did more than sting. They ignited a quiet, steady flame of resolve. I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about me being slighted. This was the culmination of years of strategic manipulation, and I was done being the passive participant. I stood, letting the room take in my posture, my presence, my refusal to shrink. Then consider this my last family dinner, I said, my voice even but resonant, carrying across the polished wood and frozen stairs. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked toward the door. The act itself was simple, but it was loaded with significance. I was reclaiming agency in the only way I could, by refusing to be complicit in my own erasure. As I passed Celine, I caught the flicker of something beneath her composed mask. Irritation, disbelief, maybe even fear. I didn't need to gloat, to shout, or to retaliate immediately. My silence was my weapon. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I felt the power of choosing when and how to strike. August fell into step beside me, the quiet strength of his presence grounding my resolve. Outside, the sun was climbing, dispersing the lingering fog over Tacoma. The estate loomed behind us, grand yet hollow, its grandeur overshadowed by secrets and betrayals long buried. I inhaled the damp, fresh air, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. The first move had been made. The table had witnessed my refusal to submit. I had left without confrontation, yet my message was unmistakable. I was present, I was aware, and I would not be erased again. As we drove away, I reviewed every interaction, every smile, every strategic slight Celine had orchestrated in the past. The flash drive lay in my coat pocket, a silent reminder that evidence was on my side, that preparation would be the key to dismantling years of control and manipulation. The knowledge was intoxicating. Finally, the balance of power was no longer solely in her hands. The night air outside the Hemmings estate carried a strange mix of crisp October chill and the lingering tension from the dinner. I stepped onto the private garden path, letting the early evening shadows swallow me briefly before August's hand rested lightly on my elbow. We moved silently, the gravel crunching beneath our feet, leaving the house and its orchestrated indignities behind. My mind replayed Celine's smirk, her words dripping with deliberate contempt. "You'll always be the accident Mom never wanted." I swallowed the echo of those words, letting them settle not as pain, but as fuel. August guided me to the car, a steadying presence amid the storm of emotions still stirring inside. I leaned against the door, shivering from more than the cold, and let out a long breath that had been trapped somewhere between anger and disbelief. The drive downtown to my temporary apartment felt longer than usual, each stoplight a chance for my thoughts to tumble in unguarded spirals. The city lights reflected off the rain-slick streets, distorted like my own reflection, a distorted, fragmented version of myself that had endured decades of neglect and manipulation. Once inside my apartment, I sank into the chair by the window, the flash drive hidden in my coat pocket, weighing heavier than any burden I'd carried before. August made himself some coffee, the aromatic warmth filling the room, while I sat silently, letting my gaze drift to the cityscape beyond the rain-specked glass. The room was small, Spartan, a temporary refuge, yet it felt suffocating in its quietude. It was here, in this pause between storm and strategy, that I realized how long I had survived but never truly lived. The world outside moved on, indifferent to my absence, but I would not be silent any longer. With deliberate calm, I opened my laptop. Fingers hovering over the keys, I drafted an email to Celine. I attached an anonymized image extracted from the flash drive, just a sliver of the evidence that she had worked so hard to conceal. The subject line read, "Just a reminder, not everything stays hidden." I paused, imagining her reaction, the immediate dismissal, the thin veneer of her confidence. My heart beat steadily. For the first time, I felt the calculated calm that comes from wielding information as power. With a final tap, the email was sent. I leaned back, observing the faint glow of the screen, and waited. Minutes stretched into an hour, but there was no reply, just the distant hum of the city and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Midnight arrived, and the silence was broken by the ping of incoming mail. Celine's response blinked onto the screen, concise, cutting, and full of the same arrogance she had cultivated for years. "You've always been good at pretending to matter." My eyes scanned further. An image of me from my high school yearbook, circled in red, with a note scrawled beneath. "Still the same nobody." My first reaction was a flicker of old doubt, a whisper of the years when I had questioned my worth. But it passed quickly, replaced by a steel-edged clarity. This wasn't just a taunt, it was a challenge, an underestimation, and I intended to answer it without losing my composure. I leaned back in the chair, the shadows of the room mirroring the dark humor of Celine's arrogance. August, sipping his coffee, glanced at me knowingly. "You've always mattered. You just need to remind them why," he said quietly. His words anchored me, turning my anger into resolve. I wasn't going to react with immediate vengeance. That would be predictable. I needed precision, patience, and strategy, the very tools Celine had once underestimated in me. I opened a blank document, titling it boldly, Declaration of Claim, Marston Estate. The cursor blinked patiently, inviting the first stroke of assertion. My fingers hovered, then began typing the opening lines. To whom it may concern, I, Poppy Wren, hereby challenge the legality of the following documents. Each keystroke felt like a reclamation of agency, a subtle declaration that my existence, my rights, and my story would no longer be ignored. The air in the apartment seemed to shift, carrying the weight of intention and the faint scent of determination. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights like polished steel. It was calm, almost serene, but I knew that the quiet was temporary. The storm of confrontation was coming. I paused, eyes drifting to the street below. There was a sense of theater in all of this, the silent streets, the distant streetlights, the echo of my own heartbeat. I imagined Celine reading my message, the initial disbelief followed by indignation. She would mock, she would sneer, she would dare me to act, and I would act, but not recklessly. Every move would be measured, every disclosure strategic. The flash drive, the documentation, the evidence, it all positioned me for the inevitable confrontation. I allowed myself a small, private smile, the first genuine one in years. It wasn't joy. It was the power of knowing that for once, I held the narrative. The night deepened, and I continued drafting, organizing, clarifying, annotating evidence, making sure that every statement, every reference was precise. Hours passed unnoticed as the city hummed below. For a moment, I thought of Celine's expression at dinner, the sly arrogance, the false control. I would dismantle that facade piece by piece, exposure by exposure. Not with shouts or hysteria, but with a calm inevitability that left no room for misinterpretation. This was more than retaliation, it was reclamation, a quiet assertion that the invisible could become undeniable. Finally, I leaned back, stretching, letting the tension in my shoulders ebb slightly. The initial act was done, sending the anonymous email, setting the tone, establishing the first ripples of consequence. The next steps required patience and observation. Celine had been a master at manipulation, but even masters underestimated the persistence of someone they believed powerless. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, savoring the clarity that came from being prepared rather than reactive. August's presence remained steady beside me. We discussed logistics, potential outcomes, and the subtle ways to leverage the evidence without alerting her prematurely. Every option, every scenario was meticulously mapped, a chessboard of strategy stretching before us. The night was quiet, the calm before the storm. Yet beneath the surface, every decision, every keystroke, every calculated pause was a warning shot. Not loud, not explosive, but chilling in its precision. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets glistening under a pale morning light that filtered through my apartment window. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me as I stared at the scattered papers and files on the desk. 3 days had passed since the family dinner, yet the sting of Celine's words lingered. It wasn't just about being insulted, it was about the calculated effort to erase me, to diminish my existence. But this morning, something had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was preparing to strike back. I sat on the edge of the chair, the soft hum of the heater in the corner filling the quiet apartment. My gaze drifted to the flash drive, now a symbol of both betrayal and empowerment. I had considered countless ways to respond, Emails, calls, confrontations, but none felt precise enough. Then I opened the file labeled Celine Conspiracy MP3. Listening once more, I let the cold, calculated tones of Celine and the lawyer seep in, imprinting every word into my memory. They spoke with a confidence born from manipulation and deception, plotting to have Mom diagnosed with early dementia to gain control of the estate. My chest tightened with anger, but beneath it, there was a growing satisfaction, a sense that this time, the scales were tilting in my favor. August leaned against the doorframe, his presence reassuring yet silent. He didn't need to speak. He had seen that look in my eyes before, the one that balanced vulnerability and resolve. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. I nodded, knowing that readiness wasn't about courage alone. It was about having leverage, proof that could dismantle a web of lies. With a few clicks, I uploaded the audio file to a secure server, encrypting it and creating an anonymous link. This wasn't a move made in haste, it was a carefully measured strike. By mid-morning, I was sitting in my rented office, a small room with a view of the Seattle skyline, the gray water of Puget Sound shimmering in the distance. The sunlight filtering through the blinds barely penetrated the haze of thoughts in my mind. My attorney, a seasoned professional who had never been intimidated by Celine's influence, waited across the desk, reviewing copies of forged documents and the audio file. "You're really going to go public with this?" she asked, her tone calm but tinged with curiosity. I met her eyes evenly. "Yes, but strategically. I'm not exposing everything at once. I want her to underestimate me, to keep revealing herself, piece by piece." Together, we drafted the Petition for Inheritance Fraud Investigation, including every detail August and I had compiled: manipulated wills, altered legal documents, and the recorded conversations. Each word was intentional, each paragraph a testament to the careful planning that had brought me here. Filing it with King County Superior Court, I felt a mix of empowerment and apprehension. The legal system could protect the truth, but it was also a stage for Celine's theatrics. I had to remain vigilant, knowing that any misstep could be turned against me. Celine's phone call came shortly after the filing. Her voice was sharp, as if laced with fire and ice. "You think you're clever? You've just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, each syllable dripping with arrogance. I responded evenly, my voice quiet but unwavering. "Then you better pray that tape isn't the only thing I've got." Her laughter echoed through the receiver, mocking and confident. Yet beneath her mockery, I sensed an edge of unease. She hadn't anticipated the precision of my actions. The afternoon passed in a haze of preparation and silent observation. I reviewed the evidence again, cross-referencing dates, conversations, and signatures. Each detail reinforced the clarity I had gained. Celine's manipulations were intentional, methodical, and calculated to exclude me at every turn. The betrayal wasn't personal, it was deliberate, orchestrated with precision. And now, finally, I had the power to respond with equal precision. At 5:59 p.m., I poured a glass of red wine, the deep color reflecting the dimming light of the city. I settled into my chair, feeling the weight of anticipation and resolve. The journalist I had contacted earlier confirmed the story would go live at 6 p.m. I watched the second hand tick closer, each movement echoing in the quiet room like a drumbeat heralding the coming storm. Outside, the city seemed unaware, but in the digital world, everything was about to change. I took a deep breath, allowing the tension to settle into a focused determination. This was more than just retaliation, it was a statement, a recalibration of power that Celine had long assumed she controlled. Every file, every piece of evidence, every calculated pause was a chess move, forcing her to react while I dictated the rhythm. I imagined her reading the email, the initial disbelief turning into anger, perhaps even panic. But I didn't care about her emotions. I cared about the consequences of her actions finally being visible to others, undeniable, and public. As the clock struck 6, my phone buzzed with the first notifications. Headlines, shares, comments, all rippling outward, touching people I hadn't even considered. Celine's influence was vast, but it couldn't withstand this level of exposure. I sipped my wine, feeling the first surge of empowerment tempered with the knowledge that the battle was just beginning. Each notification was a confirmation. The invisible threads of deception she had spun were unraveling, one click at a time. August stood quietly behind me, his expression unreadable but approving. "You're not just fighting back," he said softly. "You're controlling the narrative." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the screen, knowing that the next hours would be decisive. This was the culmination of strategy, patience, and courage, and I was ready to see it through. No longer just surviving, I was now actively reclaiming what was mine. The first wave of reactions had barely settled before I noticed the subtle shift. My apartment, normally a sanctuary of quiet, felt alive with notifications. The coffee I had poured an hour earlier was now lukewarm, forgotten on the counter as I scrolled through social media. The audio file had gone live, and the world was starting to turn in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Friends I had trusted forwarded the links, and strangers commented with a mix of outrage and sympathy. "Finally, someone is holding her accountable," one post read. Another, "I can't believe what families hide from each other." For the first time in years, I allowed myself a breath of relief. I wasn't invisible anymore. August leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his expression guarded. "This is good," he murmured, eyes on the screen. "But you know she's not going to take this lying down." I nodded, knowing full well the kind of fire Celine was capable of. She thrived on control, and when control slipped, she lashed out in ways that could be devastating if underestimated. By early evening, the first retaliation began. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from people I didn't recognize, links to videos portraying me as unstable, greedy, a schemer. Celine's PR team had worked fast, editing clips, crafting narratives, and releasing them under the guise of concerned relatives. Anonymous accounts surfaced, sharing alleged restraining orders, rehab stints, and financial troubles. Lies, every one of them, yet the precision cut deep. I sat at the edge of my couch, gripping my wine glass tighter than I realized. The anger simmered beneath a layer of calculated calm. I wouldn't respond impulsively. Not yet. Hours later, August checked the cloud storage. Some of the files we had uploaded, the backups, the documents proving Celine's manipulations, were gone. My heart sank for a moment, then hardened into resolve. "It's a digital takedown," he said, voice low but steady. "She's brought in professionals. This isn't casual." I exhaled slowly, thinking through every detail. She could delete files, distort evidence online, but she couldn't erase history, and she couldn't erase what we had prepared in the physical world. My mind raced through strategies, printouts, analog backups, verified witnesses. I had to be smarter, faster, more precise. The world outside seemed oblivious to the storm raging in my apartment. The Seattle skyline, tinted orange by the setting sun, reflected in my window panes. I could almost imagine Celine, somewhere across the city, watching her tactics unfold with the same gleeful malice she had wielded at every family gathering. But I had learned patience and strategy over the years, the kind that comes from surviving countless small battles without losing sight of the endgame. Messages from journalists began trickling in, some cautious, some hesitant. They had received the anonymous link and wanted to verify the information, but Celine's digital erasure campaign complicated the process. My lawyer reassured me, "We have copies stored offline. Nothing she can hack will touch it." Relief, however fleeting, washed over me. The battle wasn't only about digital presence, it was about evidence, integrity, and the unshakable truth. Late into the evening, as the lights of downtown Seattle began to twinkle below, my mother's voicemail played on my phone. Her words were hesitant, almost apologetic. "Poppy, why can't you just let it go?" I paused, listening, letting the sting of her passive suggestion sink in. Let it go. Letting it go would erase every slight, every betrayal, every calculated humiliation Celine had orchestrated for years. No, I wouldn't let it go, not until justice, however measured, was done. August watched me, his expression unreadable. "She's counting on you to falter. Don't." I nodded, letting my thoughts settle into focus. This wasn't about personal vindication alone. It was about revealing the truth, reclaiming my place in a family that had repeatedly attempted to erase me. With each passing hour, the stakes increased, but so did my clarity and resolve. I would fight on multiple fronts: legal, public, and emotional. Every detail mattered, every timing was calculated. At one point, August pulled a dusty, unmarked box from the corner of the apartment, something he had discovered years ago. Inside, untouched by hackers or tampering, lay a physical hard drive, labeled 2015 Vault Copy. A smile flickered on his face. She played digital. Let's go analog. Relief mixed with a spark of hope ran through me. There it was, an unassailable record, a tangible proof of what had transpired. Celine could manipulate screens, delete files, even sway some journalists, but she couldn't erase the reality stored on this drive. I sat back, staring at the hard drive, the hum of the apartment now sounding like the quiet before a storm. I felt the weight of anticipation and the first shiver of excitement, the knowledge that I was ready to strike back in ways she hadn't anticipated. The smear campaign, the digital attacks, the manufactured stories, they would all crumble once the analog evidence surfaced. I would not just survive this, I would reclaim my narrative entirely. The notifications on my phone continued to chime, each one a reminder that the world outside was watching. Comments, shares, and private messages built a complex web of engagement, amplifying the story in ways I couldn't have achieved alone. Every sympathetic note, every inquiry, every online discussion built momentum that Celine couldn't entirely control. I sipped the wine in my hand and allowed a rare, small smile to form. The tide was shifting. As the night deepened, August and I began planning our next moves, filing additional reports, preparing press statements, and coordinating with allies who had been silently observing Celine's behavior for years. It was meticulous, strategic, and deliberate. We weren't rushing. Every action was a calculated step to ensure that Celine could no longer hide behind her polished veneer of innocence. The week leading up to the hearing had felt like wading through thick fog, tenuous, slow, and heavy with anticipation. Even after the adrenaline of my small victories, I couldn't let my guard down. Seattle's morning drizzle mirrored my inner tension as August and I drove toward the courthouse. His hands gripped the steering wheel with a calm precision, a steadying contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. Every scenario, every possible maneuver Celine might attempt, played in fast forward in my head. I wasn't just walking into a courtroom. I was stepping into a battlefield where years of deceit and manipulation would be exposed under fluorescent lights and the gaze of legal authority. The King County Superior Court loomed ahead, austere and imposing. Its gray stone facade seemed almost cold, a fitting backdrop for what would be a trial not just of documents, but of character, morality, and the invisible lines of trust torn apart over decades. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored gray suit, an armor of sorts, shedding the invisible girl identity that Celine had forced upon me for so long. August carried the sealed hard drive, a physical testament to the evidence that digital deletions could never touch. My lawyer gave me a nod, a subtle cue. This is it, the swing, make it count. Inside, the courtroom buzzed quietly with anticipation. Celine arrived first, flanked by her team of sharp-eyed attorneys. Her expression was calm, almost smug, the kind of confidence that only comes from years of manipulating perception. She scanned the room with a casual, dismissive air, as if she were already certain of victory. Viola entered last, her posture tentative, her eyes unreadable, betraying the inner conflict she'd carried for so long. The judge's gavel finally called the room to order, and a hush fell over the crowded space. I drew a deep breath, letting the weight of preparation settle over me. Focus. Clarity. This was the moment every sleepless night, every whispered warning, every shiver of anxiety had led to. August stepped forward, placing the hard drive on the judge's bench alongside a printed transcript and supporting documentation. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, yet a sense of calm threaded through my chest. The judge examined the materials with an unhurried gaze. Celine's hands clenched slightly at her sides. The evidence included emails, video footage, and even screenshots that clearly showed her manipulating financial documents, falsifying signatures, and gaslighting not just me, but our mother. A few gasps echoed through the courtroom, and I noticed one juror drop their pen in surprise. The room's energy shifted. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't just a shadow in my mind, it was tangible, undeniable, and legally significant. Celine's defense crumbled almost immediately. Her lawyer, flustered, attempted to cast doubt. "This is circumstantial," he argued. "There's no timestamp on some of these documents." The judge raised an eyebrow, scanning the metadata embedded in the offline backups. "Did you forge your mother's signature?" The question hung in the air like a knife. Celine's composure faltered ever so slightly. For all her polished veneer, the cracks were beginning to show. Then Viola, our mother, rose. Trembling, hesitant, but resolute. Her voice wavered initially, but strengthened as she spoke. I remember. I never signed that version." Her eyes met mine, brimming with remorse and relief simultaneously. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I wanted to, but she told me you were sick. She told me you weren't capable of understanding." Relief and a bittersweet sorrow washed over me. Years of doubt, of fighting silently against invisibility, now felt validated. The truth was not only mine, it was witnessed, acknowledged, and irrevocable. Throughout the proceedings, I kept my composure, letting the evidence speak louder than any outburst I could muster. I thought of every event Celine had orchestrated against me, the gala where I was made invisible, the manipulations that kept me second-guessing, and the constant undermining of my capabilities. Today, those patterns were laid bare, stripped of glamour, and presented for scrutiny. The courtroom became the stage where every subtle slight, every calculated maneuver, finally had consequence. By mid-morning, the judge ruled that a full audit of the estate documents would be ordered. Celine's unilateral control was suspended pending the review. My chest tightened as the gavel hit the block. Closure, validation, yet not total relief. Outside, a throng of reporters waited, cameras flashing, pens poised. I stepped forward, facing them with a composure that surprised even me. I spoke simply, letting each word carry weight. "I'm not here for revenge, I'm here for truth." The murmur among the press grew, the world finally acknowledging the reality that had been obscured for far too long. The day passed in a blur of formalities and interviews, each moment a reinforcement that the narrative was finally shifting. Friends and allies approached, some cautiously, others openly admiring the steadfastness that had carried me through every previous humiliation. Even with this vindication, I felt a subtle ache, a reminder that justice, though potent, does not erase years of emotional labor or mend fractured trust overnight. Healing would be gradual, measured, and deeply personal. Returning to my apartment that evening, I set the hard drive safely on my desk, a physical monument to resilience and careful strategy. August remained nearby, reviewing details of the next steps and potential complications. The city lights of Seattle shimmered against the windows, reflecting the reality that this battle had been long and intricate, fought in multiple arenas simultaneously: legal, digital, and emotional. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and allowed a quiet moment to settle in. For the first time in years, I could see a faint light at the end of the tunnel, though the work of rebuilding relationships, reclaiming autonomy, and trusting again would stretch far beyond the gavel's echo. Even after the judge's gavel fell and the courthouse emptied, the streets of Seattle felt oddly silent, as if the city itself was catching its breath. I walked along Queen Anne Avenue, the morning sun casting long, pale shadows through the budding spring trees. The 2 months since the hearing had been a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion. Celine hadn't gone to jail, not yet, but her public humiliation had been swift and unforgiving. News outlets had run the story repeatedly. Her financial manipulation, the falsified documents, the gaslighting, it was all out, undeniable, and the social ripple effect had left her isolated. Former allies and friends had distanced themselves quietly, some claiming ethical conflicts, others simply unwilling to be associated with a tarnished reputation. The world she had built on deception and intimidation was crumbling like old plaster. I sipped my coffee slowly at a quiet cafe, watching pedestrians pass, feeling the weight of months of strategizing and fighting dissipate ever so slightly. The headline on the paper in front of me read, "Hemming's heiress removed amid fraud probe." I exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering tension curling through me. My mother, Viola, now resided in a care facility, gradually rebuilding the trust she had once reserved for Celine. It was a tentative process, filled with awkward phone calls and carefully scheduled visits, but it was happening. My heart felt lighter knowing she could finally see the truth, though the path toward full reconciliation would require patience, understanding, and time. The bitterness of past betrayals lingered, but the sweetness of vindication was undeniable. I had survived Celine's manipulations, navigated the maze of family deceit, and emerged with both integrity and purpose intact. The letter from my cousin arrived mid-morning, a simple envelope containing a note of acknowledgement and apology. She admitted she had been silent too long, that she regretted not speaking up sooner. Most of the rest of the family remained distant, unwilling to confront Celine directly or take sides publicly. I accepted it as a part of reality. Family can fracture, and sometimes healing isn't about forcing reconciliation, it's about establishing boundaries, preserving oneself, and finding peace in the knowledge that truth had finally been recognized. I folded the letter carefully, setting it aside, feeling a quiet resolve settle in my chest. The notion of unconditional forgiveness had given way to understanding, tempered with realism. Some wounds may never fully heal, and that was acceptable. Strength, I realized, wasn't always about closure. Sometimes it was about acknowledgement and moving forward on one's own terms. Later that afternoon, I opened the doors to my new nonprofit office, the Unseen Foundation. It was modest but warm, bathed in natural light that streamed through the large windows. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the corner. I had envisioned this space as a sanctuary for women overlooked, marginalized, or undermined in family estate disputes, those who, like me, had been rendered invisible, dismissed, or coerced into silence. The first group of hires arrived, eager yet nervous, each carrying their own stories of injustice and perseverance. I greeted them personally, sharing my journey not as a lecture, but as an example of resilience and actionable insight. There was a palpable sense of purpose in the room. Each person's eyes reflected recognition, empowerment, and hope. I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a deep satisfaction in creating something tangible from the wreckage of past turmoil. By mid-afternoon, I drove to the old family cabin, the place where, months before, I had been abandoned in the dark storm, left to navigate fear and isolation on my own. The cabin stood quietly amidst the awakening spring forest, untouched and yet somehow alive with memories. I stepped onto the gravel path, feeling the damp earth under my boots, and approached the spot where the car had stopped that fateful night. My chest tightened with recollection, the bitter sting of fear and betrayal still fresh in memory. Yet standing there, breathing in the crisp, clean air, I whispered softly, "Thank you," because that was the night I came back to life. The words felt right, not for Celine, not for the past, but for me, for reclaiming my story, my voice, and my autonomy. That night had tested every limit, every ounce of endurance, and here I stood, triumphant not through vengeance, but through the reclamation of self. August appeared beside me, his presence steady, his eyes reflecting the same pride I felt, but tempered with caution. "What now?" he asked, in his measured, familiar way. I considered him, the months of strategy and the challenges we had weathered together. "Now," I replied, smiling faintly, "I help other women find their way out of the storm." And in that declaration, there was truth, purpose, and a quiet finality. Not every scar had faded, not every bridge repaired, but the path forward was mine to navigate. The lessons of betrayal, resilience, and empowerment had converged, forming a foundation that could not be undermined. The world outside hummed with activity, oblivious to the personal revolutions quietly taking shape within these moments of reflection and resolve. In that calm, I finally felt the subtle, enduring warmth of closure. The spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows as I turned to the small team assembled in the office. Each face bore quiet determination, a shared understanding of mission and potential. I glanced at the stack of case files, the notes, and the plans for outreach, realizing that this endeavor was not just about rectifying the injustices I had faced, but about creating a tangible framework for others to reclaim dignity, voice, and agency. The office, once a blank space, now vibrated with purpose and promise. I felt the same energy that had carried me through fear, betrayal, and uncertainty, focused, deliberate, unstoppable. As the morning waned into early afternoon, I took a final walk through the neighborhood, reflecting on the contrast between what had been and what had become. The cityscape, alive and bustling, mirrored my own transformation. From silence to voice, from invisibility to recognition, from passive endurance to active empowerment. Every street corner, every coffee shop window, every familiar pedestrian carried echoes of the past and the hope for the future. I recognized finally that healing wasn't instantaneous, nor was it complete, but it was real, tangible, and entirely mine to claim. The day concluded with quiet satisfaction. Viola's voice over the phone was warm, steadying, an affirmation of the fragile, emerging bond between us. The unseen foundation's doors were open, the team ready, and the mission clear. I sat at my desk, eyes lingering on the sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor, allowing myself the luxury of reflection. The war with Celine had changed everything, but it hadn't broken me. I had survived, reclaimed my voice, and forged a path that would guide not only myself, but countless others out of the shadows into empowerment. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past lift just enough to step forward into the future I was determined to build.